right, welcome everybody. I'm Brian Abrams, and
My name's Michael Viega, pronouns he, him, his.
I'm also a he, him, his, and this is my pandemic hair, so yeah, same thing. All right, here we go. And welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about an ongoing research project into understanding transgenerational trauma and grief through digitally remixing music of the Holocaust. So this is what we're sharing with your current findings in an arts-based research study, which consists of remixing archival compositions by persons who were victims of the Holocaust in order to explore transgenerational elements of trauma and grief embodied within these works. Hey, Mike, could you do me a favor and turn off the entry exit chime? Still able to do that? You got it. Awesome. Thank you. Concepts from Jungian, Humanistic, and Transpersonal theory are integrated into the conversation. So both Mike and I are involved in this project, but the project kind of, in a sense, utilizes me as a research instrument. In a sense, utilizes my life experience and my psyche as a research instrument because I embody the phenomenon that we're studying. So this it's kind of an interesting, partly it's a heuristic first-person study, but also arts-based, and it's not just about me because this is about a transgenerational phenomenon that exists on a ethnic and cultural level, which is much larger than my individual experience. But my individual experience is part of the access to this phenomenon we're looking at, as are the songs. So together, my experience and the songs, looking at that through the remixing process is what we're doing here. So I do have to start with who I am. So I am white-skinned. Okay? I say that very deliberately as opposed to saying I am white. There's an important distinction, which is that while I am white-skinned, I benefit from white privilege. I move through society benefiting from all the ways that somebody does when they look like me. At the same time, though, I'm Jewish. So there's a really interesting kind of intersection with being a white-skinned Jewish person. There's a Jewish diaspora of people who look many, many different ways. And I'm only one way that people look. And so let me go through the rest of this. I'm in my early 50s. I'm cis hetero male, non-normative, non-binary, ability neurotypical. I'm non-religious, secularized, but I'm ethnically, culturally Jewish. So I don't really practice Judaism as you would as a religion, but I still consider it my ethnicity. It's my cultural roots. And that means something in and of itself. I'm third, fourth generation United States immigrant, originating from Russia, Poland, possibly Latvia. We're not really sure, but we think that some of my ancestors came from German-occupied Latvia. And I've been a music therapist since 1995, private practice in music psychotherapy, GIM, analytical music therapy, which is where a lot of this came up for me for the first time when I started thinking about transgenerational phenomena. Was really in working in those media as a client and as a therapist. These things came up. So I've worked with people who had various forms of trauma, including transgenerational trauma, and as I said, through my own experiences. And I've written a piece, hopefully that'll end up in the Nordic Journal, that explains some of my experiences, share some of my experiences in analytical music therapy with Benedict Skybrew that uncovered a lot of these phenomena. So also important to know is my genealogy. So this is part of the where I came from question. And so looking at my immediate parents, Nancy and Steve, I was raised in Brooklyn, again, secularized Jewish family. Ruth and Nat, my mom's mom and dad, also from Brooklyn. Gladys and Ben, my dad's mom and dad, and they came, Ben came from Russia, Gladys was born in New Jersey. And then you can see the next level, my great-grandparents, Anna and Louis, possibly German-occupied Latvia, Nellie and Alex from Lodz, Poland, Sarah and Simon from Russia, and Miriam and Isidore from Russia. So there's a lot of Russian heritage. And I should say that although we're focusing on the Holocaust and that generation of trauma, there was plenty of trauma in Tsarist Russia when Jews were targeted in what we call the pogroms, which were kind of like ethnic cleansing acts that were pretty horrifying and were genocidal as well. So Jewish people have had this experience for many, many generations and long before that as well. But this is my immediate sort of genealogy, just to give a context of who I am, again, as the research, as the source of the data we're looking at in addition to the songs. I want to come back just a little bit to what I was saying about whiteness and white-skinned Jews. It's an interesting phenomenon because what I've been reading is that there's this term called conditional whiteness. And if you think about white supremacist movements and Nazism, and they specifically don't really consider Jewish people white people like they are, right? We may have white skin, we may get to benefit from the privileges of looking white, and that's true, I do all the time. But that's exactly the catch, is that you get to assimilate into a white dominant society because you look this way if you cooperate with the larger agenda of white supremacy. And if you kind of play the game, if you are complicit in a certain way, if you act in accordance with white supremacist dominating principles of colonialism, you get to sort of jump on that train of privilege. The moment you step out of line, you are suddenly Jewish first. I remember times when I felt Jewish. There were times when I could forget my Jewishness submerged in whiteness, in an everyday way, my experience typically. But I remember times like, for example, there was a time when I got stopped at there was a stop sign, I kind of rolled past it, and a police officer in an area that I know where the police happened to be members of the KKK stopped me, and I knew this guy had a sense that I was ethnically Jewish, right, even though I'm white skinned. And I felt a sense of fear, not at all comparable to the kind of everyday fear that Black people in the United States feel, but I got a sense of that sense of danger of like where, suddenly I'm my ethnicity first. And I just remember feeling that. And so whiteness protects you to a certain extent. This also came up for me in the 2016 AMTA conference when we were in Sandusky, Ohio. And I remember when Trump got elected, and my first feeling was, wow, I suddenly am incredibly aware of my Jewishness in spite of my white skin. And hearing about all the white supremacy, and then seeing what subsequently happened with the rising white supremacist movements, which continue today, which do target Jewish people and even ones that look like me. So it's kind of an interesting, complicated, intersectional issue that I've been really struggling with, how I benefit from white privilege, and yet at the same time, I'm a target of white supremacy. And and how that adds to this question of trauma, transgenerational trauma. And, in order to distinguish the white-skinned Jews from other white people in Germany during the Nazi period, we were forced to wear the yellow star, right? So this way it was clear to everyone that who you were and what your ethnicity was, and that you weren't really white like other people. And so just wearing this was sort of this dehumanizing, you're your ethnicity, you're not a person, you are your Jewishness, and not really an individual. And this continues today. We're reminded periodically by white supremacy. You get it when you hear implications and strange conspiracy theories that seem to lead back to Jewish people. You get it in everyday desecration of grave sites. My son experienced it. You could see a news item there in the lower right corner. where there were some swastikas on the wall in his school, and you know, that was a stark reminder that you're reminded of your Jewishness through these acts. I also kind of want to back up because it's important. I forgot to acknowledge, and here we are online, and you can see that this is a Montclair, I'm broadcasting this from Montclair. Mike is broadcasting this from where he lives in Red Hook, New York. And I won't speak from where you are, Mike, but from here, this is the lands, stolen lands of the Lenni Lenape people. And so, you know, on top of everything else we're talking about, transgenerational trauma, I try to remember that that's true as well. Even here in cyberspace, we are physically somewhere, and we're on occupied lands. And so that consciousness is important to keep as part of the context for any larger discussion about transgenerational trauma, because it exists for Indigenous people as well. So the Holocaust was the Nazi act in the but it started sort of, the idea started in the late 20s, really it was through the 1930s, where where Jewish people were targeted as the German people's problem. It was the Jewish problem. And because Germany had gone through all kinds of economic struggles after World War I and the Treaty of Versailles, and you know, all kinds of identity crises as a country, we became scapegoats, and it became a way for German people to reclaim their identity and pride through the direct persecution of another ethnicity that had assimilated itself into society. And so the theory was, get rid of Jewish people and we will reclaim our Aryan purity, racial, ethnic purity that will give us strength again, and we'll be okay somehow by doing that. And you know, hence this systematic process, the systematic genocide of Jewish people, and not just the genocide, but the dehumanization and the everyday psychological disturbing kinds of abuse that Jewish people endured based upon their ethnic identity. Elie Wiesel is a prominent author about the experience of the Holocaust. He writes very, very graphically about it. It's really good to read his work. One thing that really struck me when I was rereading Night recently was that he was talking about his father and he being brought to the camps at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and how his father was approximately my age now relative to his age as a teenager is roughly my son's age. So I really just related to that, and I couldn't imagine what it would be like now, being a dad of a teenager being brought to the camps and having to find a way to survive. And I remember his dad had to lie about his age, say he was a little younger, and Elie had to say he was a little bit older so that they wouldn't be exterminated immediately, because too old or too young, you can't work. So that just really struck me and sits with me heavily. I'm also a big fan in my therapeutic identity. Viktor Frankl, who is a existential psychotherapist, and is also his experience is informed by the Nazi occupation and the experience of the camps and his survivorship, and how meaning was for him, the search for meaning is the big antidote for the kind of trauma that you experience when you're the victim of an ethnic genocide. But worth reading if you're not familiar with Frankl's work. I think it's extremely relevant for music therapy. And then just one of the dimensions of the trauma of having lived through the camp experiences for those who were in that era was this traumatic shame that came from the Nazis making some of the inmates Sonderkommandos, which were those who had to clean up, in a sense, clean up after the dirty deeds of the Nazis, clean up the mess. So when there would be extermination procedures and there would be the remains after the incineration of bodies, Nazis, the SS, they would not do the cleaning up. So they had prisoners do the cleaning up. So imagine the layers of trauma of actually having to sanitize after the horrific acts of genocide, sanitize your own people's bodies, and to have that role, and to, in a sense, kind of have to be complicit and endure that shame and internalize that shame. I can't imagine it, you know, and this kind of thing resonates with me today, this sense of how am I betraying my own people, survivor guilt. You know, these things come up in subtle ways in my everyday life, and I feel it resonates with this Sonderkommando experience in various ways. Transgenerational trauma is an entire theory, and it's an emerging theory. But it says, and it's extremely pertinent right now from what we're seeing in the movements happening all over the world in response to police brutality and in general white supremacy and racism, is that these experiences from previous generations leave an imprint of trauma, and that they're transmitted down the generations, not through anything magical or supernatural, but through everyday interactions with your children, the way that you are around them, the way that you manifest your anxiety and survivorship, and the things that survivorship has done to alter your consciousness inform the way that you are with your family members. And so it passes down these experiences psychologically. There is also evidence, interestingly, that there is an epigenetic component as well. So there's actually something on the physiological level, and this is probably more controversial, but they say that there are traces, genetic traces of trauma that are transmitted down generations. So it's physiological, it's psychological, it's interpersonal. It happens on many, many different levels. And just like a lot of things that are psychological, it happens on a symbolic level. So it's not like this concrete sense that, okay, here's the trauma from the Holocaust that I am now passing down to you. It manifests in ways that you have to uncover because it lives in metaphorical ways in your life, in the way that you relate to others, in the way that you think about surviving on an everyday basis. It struck me that when I was doing my work in therapy, that I had all kinds of irrational anxieties, all kinds of irrational survivor anxieties, fears of poverty, fears of death, and of persecution and things like that came up in my work, and that I remember observing in my parents and experiencing with my parents in various ways, in which have internalized themselves in me, and which I have no doubt have been transmitted down generations from specifically ethnically rooted Jewish trauma. One of the real inspirations for me has also been the work of feminist, critically Jungian psychotherapist who takes an Africanist view toward Jungian work and psychotherapy, FANNY BREWSTER. And she's a prolific author and scholar. She's written quite a lot lately on topics like this. One of the texts that resonated with me that helped inform all of this was the book on archetypal grief, Slavery's Legacy of Intergenerational Child Loss. And she really moves into some deep thought on this topic. And one of the ways in which her work resonated with me recently was, hearing the last words of George Floyd calling for his mother, saying "mama," and that, first of all, that's just, that in and of itself is so heartbreaking. It's hard to even think about. It's unfathomable, and yet at the same time, it was like, on another level, it was almost like a sacred invocation, calling for mother, his mother, but calling for mother with a big M, an archetypal mother, to take care of him, to take care of the world, take care of this crisis, intervene, bring the power, the strength, the wrath, the love of an archetypal ancestral mother which Brewster talks about. And I'm thinking about the ways in which his words invoked the presence and activated the presence of that archetypal mother in what's happening right now. So to the research question, I was asking, what could I learn about and bear witness to ethnic transgenerational trauma embodied within myself, within the Jewish community, and within humanity, while identifying healing intergenerational resources through imaginative digital remixing dialogue featuring songs composed by Jewish people during the Nazi Holocaust. And this is where Mike comes in, because I don't have 1,000th of his skills in terms of digital music technology and remixing, and I'm really inspired by what he's been doing and how his work in arts-based research and specifically in digital remixing is opening up an entire world, or contributing to an entire world of research and exploration that is really going to help us understand the value of music therapy and the value of ourselves and our musics. So, I immediately turned to him and asked for help in exploring things this way. And it was really fortunate that there is a whole compendium of music publicly available that is our songs of the Holocaust. And another quick inspiration in terms of the remixing that I'll just share. Before we had all of this, before we had so much technological, all these technological advantages of digital remixing, we had to do things on an analog level. And so Steve Reich, who was a brilliant composer of the 20th century, whose life was also informed by experiences of Nazi Germany himself, took some sound bites of interviews that he had with people who were living during that time, talking about their lives, and actual sounds of European train whistles and sirens that would have been the same ones that you heard at the time that would be surrounding the experience of the concentration camps. And so just to hear a quick excerpt of what he did, I'm not 100% familiar with what his technical process was, but I know in some of his earlier work, he was using reel-to-reel tapes, and he was doing things with analog technology that were in many ways a lot more challenging than what we have available to us right now. Here's an excerpt of Different Trains, which is the piece to which I was referring to.
1940, on my birthday.
Okay, so you hear he was looping. He was using a looping technique, and he was taking the contours of the voices, not so much the content of what they said, but how they said it, and would echo them in the strings. And so he was writing this composition, but then also using technology to loop and repeat an idea, because the way that we express an experience and the way that we experience trauma is not in just straight on verbal discourse where you express an idea and it's done. You experience it in a loop. You repeatedly experience it. It's like, fortunately, we have music therapy to work with that, but in music, something can repeat, and it's an acceptable aesthetic form. It echoes the way we psychologically experience trauma and memories this way. So it's a kind of a beautiful expression of an embodiment of that whole experience in this work. And this was very inspirational in bringing this to Mike. So I'm going to let Mike turn this over to Mike to talk a little bit about the process here of the remixing.
Sure. Hi, everybody. To honor all the what Brian has just shared and my role in his process, it's quite an honor within the research process to be sitting in a state where I'm allowed into his personal experience and into this work. And my role here was to help translate some of his experiences into sonics and into sound. And Brian, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. All right. And so in that way, I felt like I was a vessel of his experience to help then enhance what he was learning from the original songs, and have him then hear my remixes and him further his exploration and deepen his exploration. And he would give me feedback and I would then go back. So the kind of creative worldview here and methodology is what's known as arts-based research, in which really works of art are works of research. There's no binary between art and research. And we take a creative worldview as arts-based researchers into how to explore the questions. In this case, remixing was the main method of uncovering. Remixing is, as Brian had explained, is in this case was digitally sampling or cutting and pasting moments within the songs that were really resonating with Brian, and then giving them a new musical context for exploration. So Brian will share some of those with you, but how it all unfolded was that he would listen to a piece, he would share with me his overall images and experiences, and time stamps, time moments too, sometimes of what stood out to him. And what I would do is I would attempt to take a lot of the metaphors and the word metaphors and recreate that, what his experience was in sound, and share it with him. And oftentimes he would then come back to me and say, you know, this really resonated with me, but what I continue to get out of is there needs to be more of this, that, or the other, and I would go back to help further his exploration. What's really nice about this kind of about working in this way is that in some ways we mirror our clinical practice of how we would unfold and uncover our own experiences in the music. So it's using research methods that are more akin to actual clinical work. And it also allows these songs to be experienced interrelationally, and so that, you know, we can have dialogue of experience. But primarily, these remixes relate to Brian's own personal process of uncovering through this. So he would share with me the songs. I would usually take moments from the songs and use a MIDI controller to loop or to capture certain moments of the songs. And then I used a program called Arcade by Output, which is just really a looping station for online, a looping station you can get that has a vast wealth of library of different sounds, so that I could really capture certain metaphors that he was experiencing and collage these sounds and build this sonic environment for him. So ultimately, he's able to live within a certain sonic environment, close his own eyes and experience what that environment is like for himself, and then learn from that as he continues. So I'll allow Brian now to share some of those experiences.
Yeah, and I just, you know, I also want to thank Mike again for this process, because it's really the iterative process that makes this so special, that I discovered things that would not have come to my consciousness otherwise. You know, if I had not gone through this process of giving him an idea, he gives something back, it speaks to me, it brings something, it illuminates something, you know, that one of those aha moments, and then I feed that back. You know, it's a real organic, artistic, aesthetic process that reveals this, you know, these important parts of not just my individual self, but of this shared experience, ethnically shared experience. So I'm really grateful, you know, that we had a chance to do this. This is research, but this is something that I think is really important for me and for humanity. So there's 3 examples that we'll share. Hopefully we'll have time. The The three examples, again, come from a site, Holocaust Music. I have to get the exact URL. I think it's holocaustmusic.com. They have publicly available excerpts of music of people who wrote music in the ghettos, in sometimes secretly in the camps, in the experiences surrounding the Holocaust, and so it's different phases and different opportunities. And it's a really importantly curated site that they've preserved this and have made it available. And thank goodness, it's voices of experiences that need to be preserved desperately in a unique way in music, which is different, again, from just telling the story. Like you heard in Reich's piece, there's something revelatory in the musics of those experiences that gets deeper into it. So here I'll share the original, maybe not the whole thing, of one example of a song titled Ghetto that was part of the experience of being in the ghettos, which is where Jewish people were corralled before eventually being sent to the camps. So it was a way of kind of consolidating, ethnic consolidation in one area, isolating, and then from there systematically moving to the concentration camps. So it was the first step in sort of concentration. And the word ghetto originates with this process of concentrating in certain areas. It's an Italian word. So this is an expression of the experience. And even without knowing all the textual components, because it's in Yiddish, you get a sense of what the experience is in hearing the music. So just take a listen to the original.
Wir stehen bei der Wand, steht das Haus wie ein Verklemmter, mit der abgerossten Hand, wie ein weinende Gewerbe. Es gucken Augen zwei, gucken ein sich in der Weitkeit. Es erscheint durch sei ein klare Welt, noch schwer zu sehen die Welt, durch enge Mauern, das Glück oben verstellt, die
Okay, I'm going to stop the excerpt there. Mike's going to post the resource from the Holocaust Museum for the link to the music that we extracted for this. He'll do that in the chat box. Thanks, Mike. So you probably heard some of the expressions of anguish, the sense of all the space in the music, the isolation, the sense of desperation, you know, when all of a sudden you're uprooted from your home and you're brought to this place and it's in the middle of the night, there's no explanation, you're exhausted, it's a bizarre experience, it's a crisis. And so I'm amazed, you know, in the middle of all that, to be able to compose music really says something. So very impressive. Yeah, so I'm sorry, so yes, it's holocaustmusic.ort.org. And so in this this ghetto song, my impressions, metaphors I gave to Mike were, this is not my home, but it's the final place where I will live. I want to be alone, but there are too many others here. In other words, privacy. Not enough are doing what they can do to stop this. I am going to do all I can to stop this. I will not be able to stop this. I will die trying, as I will die either way. I am not fearless. I am terrified. I am walking into the horrible sound, into the flame anyway. I need for my death to matter and for my life to have mattered. So in a sense, I'm giving voice to the underlying message that I'm hearing and that I'm resonating with myself in listening to the voice in the music and imagining what that experience was. I should mention some of the things I'm saying here speak to resistance. There were forms of resistance. There were forms of uprisings against the Nazi occupation, against the Nazi forces. And those resistances were quickly put down. People were basically killed if you did it, but some people felt you have to do it anyway. And that's kind of the feeling I had here. So I gave these to Mike, and this is what he came back with in the remix. Okay, so you heard the multiple voices in that, the sort of the cyclic quality of it, the beat, which served its own purpose of that underlying feeling in the body, which adds to that I feel in that the anxiety, my heart's just pounding, what's going to happen next. And then when it drops out, you know, there's that sense of almost resignation and it's like, okay, you know, what's going to happen is going to happen. And there's lots and lots of impressions that can come from this. But I felt Mike really nailed the metaphors well. Mike, anything to add with that one?
No, because I like hearing from your experience within it as the conduit of the music towards you, you know.
Yeah, I get it. Although I do find it interesting that the remixer is still going to get into the mix, in a sense, and feel things and experience the trauma on a certain level. You know, it's kind of that part of it fascinates me too.
Yeah, and just, you know, to let everybody know that I did not spend long on the remixes, that I wanted them to be spontaneous. They were all very quickly done in terms of I wanted it to be spontaneous and immediate, and you know, as soon as the sound came and I utilized it. The only refining that happened was once the feedback from Brian came back to where it's like, you know, add multiple voices, or I want to hear the voices need to now extend and expand into different areas. So there are, you know, in a headphone space, the panning is used or various effects are used specifically and in the mix. So something might be very hidden within the mix. A voice might be buried for the particular metaphor within the mix. So I was, you know, and sometimes I found that myself, from being from non-Jewish background, that I often wanted to make or bring in more light within the music. And Brian, and a couple pieces was like, and I need it to be as claustrophobic as possible. That guitar is just too much. It's brand, and so it was interesting to see what I might have brought in terms of choices, and then check myself within those choices as well.
And so on that exact note, this example, Bergen-Belsen, Moje, is a kind of just a beautiful folk song that originated, I believe, in Poland. And this was the way it was sung in the context of, this was a concentration camp composition. The way that it was sung was in the sense of both beauty, needing the beauty as something soothing in a situation that was very hopeless. You could hear the hopelessness in the voice. Let me play the original, and you get the sense that it is something. It's about loving the land where you live, loving the town where you live, but also feeling like the end is here.
Bergen belzen moje, płakać nie mam siły. Bergen belzen moje.
Okay, so you can hear what I'm talking about. There, the guitar was just very lightly supporting things. In Mike's original remix, he emphasized the guitar, and like he said, he brought a lot of light in, and it was beautiful. And my feeling was it needs to honor the darkness of the true depth of the despair in this voice and in what's happening. And interestingly, it was through that I felt more of the actual resource and hope for moving through it. It first had to go through its true depths of despair for me to then discover something in it that felt to me, here's where possible hope and healing lies, which is interesting. So here's at least an excerpt of the remix for you. I remember telling Mike, I need more apocalypse. You know, it started out kind of, you know, nice and soothing, and I was like, you know, bring the depth, you know, lower kind of, you know, catastrophic sounds. And what was interesting in that is in listening a few times, this is true, and we know this in therapy. You can't, if you avoid the depths of your psyche because they're difficult places to go, you avoid the resources that you really have to draw from. And I completely experienced that here. I felt the power and strength collectively in this from other people who have experienced this. It was really only through going to that level that I was able to feel it.
I remember saying, well, if you want that, okay. And there's samples of chainsaws in there and knife sharpening and horrific sounds that I tried to collage in there that at first kind of wanted to avoid, and wasn't sure if I wanted to actually put that in sound. So again, back to the countertransference of needing to rescue, but yeah.
And you know, and it's interesting because that's a struggle for me too, because, you know, rescue doesn't sound like such a bad thing in the middle of all that depth. And rescue is what happened in the concentration camps. You know, basically the Allied forces and the American troops rescued people in camps. So, you know, there's that part of the legacy too. And the question of, you know, do we owe anything to anyone? It's very complicated, right? But there's a lot of that there too. Okay, last one, just a little sample of this. This is another, I consider, beautiful piece. Again, originating from within the camps. And this one is just more like, literally the words are about needing to be heard, needing to be understood. And this resonates within my life. I've always been a person that really being understood, being heard correctly for what I'm intending to say matters so much. You know, I end up sometimes in these conversations where I will multiply iterates, you know, my meaning to make sure that somebody understands what I'm saying. It's hard for me to let that go. And I see that in myself, and I see that in the desperation to be heard, to make sure that somebody hears where you're coming from. So in this, I'll give you my words of impression even before, you know, even before, you know, the song plays. Hear my voice from the depths of suffering. It is so important for me to be understood. I need to connect through these icy walls. I need to feel you and for you to feel me.
Słyszcie nasz chorał z piekła dna. Niech naszym katom w uszach gra. Chorał, chorał.
So that's the excerpt we had from the site. Here's the remix. I'm leaping ahead just a little bit for time's sake. So what I was asking Mike to do there was to create a kind of a diasporic sense in the voices would begin to spread out. And, you know, you had this sense of both people dying away in some way, but also re-establishing themselves within the world. It's something happening there that was both despair and hope simultaneously in the traumatic depths that we were exploring sonically. So again, it's one of those examples. And I forgot to mention the metaphors in the last piece, but there was this sense of not lightening up, you know, staying heavy. That applies here too. And it's one of those things, probably it's true for most of you too, but I can't stand when someone says lighten up. One of the worst things you could say to someone when you're experiencing something deep and profound and difficult, it really dismisses the pain and the trauma and the real suffering and doesn't give you the chance to work through it. So therapy is not about lightening up, cheering up, never has been, not for me. And this just really emphasizes that. So,
Brian,
yeah,
Ethan, we have about 4 minutes, and Ethan has a question about the choice of the pulse in the first piece within Ghetto. Do you remember how that choice came about? I don't really remember. Was that just done by me aesthetically creating, or did you ask?
I think you took some aesthetic liberties there, but I think I remember having some conversation with you about the deep anxiety.
Oh, so there was a purposeful heartbeat that I was speeding up and reversing and speeding up. Yeah.
That's how I relate to it.
That's how I remember too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good question.
Thank you, Ethan.
And so, yeah, we talked about resiliency and remixing as a kind of remixing is a kind of a reconciliation and transfiguration. It's not fixing something. It's not changing history in terms of sanitizing it. It's acknowledging history in its fullness and then allowing for new possibilities of bringing things forward, right, into the future. Would you agree with that, Mike?
Yeah, it's honoring the work of the past and allowing voices to emerge and creating possibilities for a new future. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So I end with just one. I'll sing one chorus of this song because I feel like it just honors the cultural histories that we've been talking about, and it's also very relevant right now. And then if there's a minute for questions, we'll stay open. So this is Humanistic. Hine ma tohu manayim, shevet achim ham yachad. Hine ma tohu manayim, shevet achim ham yachad. Means, behold how good and enjoyable it is to be together in unity. There's many ways that we're hoping for right now.
Sure.